So let's get going. I'm talking to you this morning about fearlessness and leadership, and I kind of want to contextualize that, I guess, with two foundational premises about the context of where we find ourselves. Um, it's my view, and the view of many others at this time, that we're living in times of extreme change that call for courage. Um, I think the change in our generations, technological, environmental, global change is unprecedented in human history. And there's been some talk recently, and an official sort of uh, definition of us being in an era called the Anthropocene era. And the idea of that is that in this time, humans are having an impact on the rest of the world in ways that we simply haven't done through the rest of the history, the billions of years that the Earth has existed. And so the courage that requires of us as leaders to stay on top of that change, to be with what's going on is immense. And there's a couple of issues within that about how do we stay with that when everything about how we're wired will be telling us to kind of not to look away. And how do we use this disruption, I guess, to come up with solutions for the future? And the other foundational premise, really, of the work that I'm going to be talking to you about this morning is that many of the issues that we're dealing with are caused by a knowing doing gap. And what I mean by that is that actually we do know what's needed. Often deep in our guts, or even not that deep inside us, we have a sense of what's needed. But actually, the systems, the processes, the structures, the ways that we're invited to step in to society in our work mean that we don't get to implement things in the way that we know they need to be done. And that causes a tension. And I suppose within that, then, the work for us, the overarching principles for us, then, about the work that we need to do are around these kind of four areas. And this is what I'm going to be talking us through this morning. There's something about feeling and sensing. And how do we deal with what we're beginning to understand might need doing, even when that feels scary, and hence the kind of focus on fearlessness, really. How do we lean into those moments of fear when actually quite a normal reaction would be to run away. And that leads into sort of sitting with the trouble rather than sidestepping it. What in the work that we've done as part of the local delivery pilot with Sport England, but in some of the other work that we've done as well in the most deprived communities, what we've concluded, and we're not alone in this work, is that it's not what you do, but the way that you do it. And that everything is connected. So in complex system leadership, you start to tug at a thread, and actually behind it comes a whole joined up mess. So how do we make sense of those complex interrelationships that exist within systems? How do we, the tendency for all of us in face of complexity will often be to try and project manage it. How do we step away from doing that? And the backdrop again of all of this is what's coined a polycrisis. So a simultaneous occurrence of several catastrophic events. And I think, most of us felt this perhaps most sharply during COVID, but actually even since, we've seen unprecedented change. Our social systems, financial, political, and other systems are in flux at the very least. Some would say are breaking down. The climate and the impact on the climate is unprecedented. I don't know how many of you listen to Radio 4, but just this morning, one of the minor news items was about a citizen science project that collects information on butterflies. It happens every year for the last 15 years. This year, the number of butterflies has dropped 50%. Now, that's one small piece of news this morning. There were loads of other bits of news that fitted into either system collapse, climate collapse, or human well-being issues, and we know that we're into a mass extinction. We are, we've got some of our brightest world minds gaming what that means for the complex system that is nature and the ecosystems we live in, and that in itself is linked to a crisis around human well-being, unprecedented levels of mental health issues for adults and for children in developed worlds, let alone some of the impacts of things like the floods in Poland and Eastern Europe at the weekend, crop failures in other parts of the world. I'm going to sound like the prophet of doom, And I don't mean to, but we can't have this discussion around why fearless leadership is important if we're not acknowledging a backdrop that most of us at some point in our day try and screen out of. We know this stuff, but we don't want to face it because it's too much, it's too big for us. What we're going to talk about this morning is how might we have some techniques that allow us to tackle some of this head on. And Otto Scharmer, who I'm going to be talking about a bit this morning, he's a professor at MIT in the States. He's done a piece of work which I'm going to talk a bit more about, but I'm going to use this quote here. And he said of this time in relation to some work pre-COVID around climate change, but this is applicable, I think, to the whole poly crisis itself. He says, what if we use this disruption as an opportunity to let go of everything that isn't essential in our life, our work, and our institutional routines? How might we reimagine how we live and work together? How might we reimagine the basic structures of our communities? And I use this quote very deliberately. I think we're at a point in society, and we know this in the work that many of us are doing, that you've introduced yourselves as being involved in this morning. We know that it's time to rethink how we're doing things. The system doesn't work for most of the people many of us are dealing with. Why should we? Why should we be fearless? And I'm just going to talk to you very, very briefly about a very sad event that happened in over Christmas and New Year earlier on this year, where in our time, on our watch, while we're the grown-ups that have some influence and control in the system, Bronson Battersby, a 2-year-old boy, starved to death and was found next to the body of his father, who'd suffered a fatal heart attack a few days before. Bronson was known to social services. He had a social worker who tried several times over the course of the days that he would have been alive to get into the flat to see if he was okay. It wasn't that there weren't people trying to check up on him. He died in a flat that was where there were other people living within a few feet of where he took his last breaths. He was known to social services, like I say. And it was only eventually when the social worker managed to get hold of the landlord and get keys and take the police in that they found his body. I can't imagine. I am a social worker, but I cannot imagine how that social worker lives the rest of her life, knowing that when she was outside the door, a few feet away from him, he would have still been alive. Our system does not work. On our watch, children tonight will go to bed without enough food. People will be living in conditions that are not suitable for humans to live in. There will be people who will not fulfill their potential. And we know that our systems don't work and that they're broken. So why we should be fearless is because the courage that is going to be needed to shift from where we are to where we need to get to make sure that the systems are supporting those in the most need will take courage. It will take people prepared to stand up and say, this isn't good enough. And again, I'm going to quote Otto Scharmer, who says that this is the moment when what we need most is enough people with the skill, heart, and wisdom to help us pull ourselves back from the edge of breakdown onto a different path. And that's the invitation of this work. What we've learnt in this journey, in the work that we've been doing now for the last 7 or 8 years, probably longer actually, in terms of the work we did that predated the work with Sport England. But what we've concluded in terms of fearless leadership are these things, and I'm going to go through these with you in a bit more detail this morning. But ultimately, if you took nothing else from it, take this, that change is an inner job. If we want to change systems, we have to change ourselves first. And I'll be talking a bit more about that. That when we notice fear, we need to lean into it. That we need to lead with purpose. So we need to understand why we're here and what we want to do about the work. We need to find connection and find a flock. This is work we cannot do on our own. And the importance of being followers. That we need to nurture courage and that it's all about practices. Practice, practice, practice. This is not something we will crack with just a single bullet. There's not one lever that we can pull or one thing that we can do that's going to shift everything. It's going to be a continuous change of small incremental practices that will make things different. So let's start with changes in a job. Let's talk a little bit more about that. Now, this leans into the work of Otto Scharmer and Theory U, and this is a very stripped out version of the Theory U principle. The process of letting go of our old self and our old way of doing things, and letting in the new. So it's a change curve. And what Otto Scharmer argues is that if at the bottom of that curve, when we've opened our mind, when we've opened our heart, and when we've opened our will, and we've allowed ourselves to let go of what we thought we knew, if we connect then to our purpose, why are we doing this work? We've and I'll talk a little bit more about each of those values in the next couple of slides. But if we let go of what we thought we knew and we connect with a purpose, a sense of value, and then we move through it into action, we will in fact not only change ourselves, but we will change the systems that we interact with, we'll change the world around us by small incremental changes. And the evidence for that is around system leadership and the fact that systems are designed to achieve what they're designed to achieve. They adapt to the behaviors of those within them. And so if we start to behave differently, it will impact on how the system is or isn't able to do its job. And I'm going to keep coming back to that. So the Theory U, this is the full Theory U change model. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about it. It's in terms of the Active Wellbeing Society, this is how we do our work, and our values, our organisational values, are about our mirror, open mind, open heart, and open will. And we have our operating processes all around that. So in our monthly one-to-ones, we will demonstrate how in the course of the last month we may have brought to life compassion and open-heartedness, or whatever. All of our systems and processes and the way that we do our work is kind of built around these values, really. And what Otto Scharmer argues is that when we start to go through a change process, whether it's moving house, whether it's initiating a new project, whatever that change process is, we start initially by thinking, what have we done before? So imagine that you're deciding to go on holiday somewhere. Most people will think about holidays they've had that they've enjoyed. So you think about what you've done before, you suspend the old ways of doing it, and then you open your mind and you see the opportunity of a holiday with fresh eyes. You redirect your attention. You might ask other people what they do on their holidays. It's called sensing into the field. You might go and explore what are the other options around a holiday. So you might, or whatever the issue is. So it's called sensing into the field, and you let go of your preconceptions of what a holiday is. And at that point, you've moved into open will. You're prepared to behave differently. And at this point, this can be a moment. You can experience it as a moment, or it can be quite a long period of time where you're just being open to what the opportunities might be. For professionals, this is often really uncomfortable because it's the point where we have to admit we don't know what the answer is because it hasn't yet arrived. And Otto Scharmer talks about it in terms of letting go and letting come. As soon as we begin to understand what that might look like, whether that's a holiday, whether that's a new asylum system, whatever, with the changes that we're seeking to do, we crystallize the vision and intention, and we get going with some prototyping. So Otto Scharmer talks about the importance of not waiting until all our ducks are lined up and we've nailed everything. He talks about the importance of just letting it come and having a go, holding it lightly, piloting, prototyping, linking open mind and curiosity with compassion and courage, and just stepping in and having a go. And from there, once you start to realize what's working and what isn't, you get to embody it, and you've created a change by operating from the whole. He talks about operating from the whole. So building on what we learned through the prototyping phase, letting go of what we thought we knew and letting come a new way of doing things. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the values of just a little bit more about open mind, open heart, and open will. So with open mind, it's being prepared to let in new ways of understanding an issue. Another way of thinking about this is seeking more of the views, hearing a wider range of views. And there are some techniques that we've discovered can really support you to do that. There's a fantastic process called deep democracy. And I will make sure that you have access to some of the resources related to this. But deep democracy encourages you to go and find the no, letting go of what you think is the way of doing it, inviting in a range of other perspectives, and just being open to the fact that while you might have done things in a particular way in the past, there could be other ways of doing it. The importance of open heart is that it invites you to connect with the feelings that evokes. So empathy, compassion, perhaps anger, perhaps despair, often grief. So, once you begin to let go of certainty and you explore how else it might be done, inevitably comes a sense of losing some control, losing some certainty. That will open up a range of feelings. How do we hold those? And then open will is being prepared to behave differently and to link to a purpose that might not be one of the outcomes in the process that we're seeking to change so far. So going further and deeper into uncertainty and complexity. And what that requires of us ultimately is to get comfortable moving from agreement and certainty to complexity and uncertainty. And I'm just going to explain the diagram that you can see here. So you've got an axis here where at the bottom you've got ordinary management. On my screen, what's a blue box, a light blue box. And at the bottom of that axis, you've got close to agreement and near to certainty. So an example of that might be, it often isn't for me, but an example of that might be following a recipe and making a cake. So you've got a very clear process. You've got a picture of what the cake looks like. You've got your ingredients laid out in front of you, and there are some key steps that you would follow. And that's ordinary management. In reality, though, when you're talking about polycrisis and system failure and system leadership, what we're often talking about are things that are far from agreement, where actually not everybody is clear, what we're even baking, and far from certain in that we don't even know what resources we're going to have to use to bake whatever it is we're going to bake. And that's where system leadership and really, the kind of the values, the techniques, the processes needed for system leadership comes in. And we're looking then at focusing on purpose, being prepared to be able to say yes to the mess, looking at experiments. So raising a child's a really good example. What even is success when it comes to raising a child? I've got more than one, and they're different, and I'm still the same parent with the same techniques. So how does that work? So we say yes to mess. We talk about understanding different perspectives, understanding that at moments in time, the same techniques will bring out a different result. Holding curiosity, the importance of just staying open to what this might look like. Encouraging connections, feedback loops become really important, networks become really important in system leadership, reducing power, and containing anxiety, importantly. It's not something we can control, which for many of us as professionals, we've got an identity as being able to go in and resolve issues. So the anxiety of not being able to predict exactly what will happen as a result of trying an experiment or launching, system leadership, actually, how do we handle that? Those are some of the issues, I guess, and the techniques we need to be able to kind of manage as we go through systems leadership. And Peter Senge, a systems scientist, says that knowing that there are no easy answers to truly complex problems, what system leaders have to do is cultivate the conditions where collective wisdom emerges over time through a ripening process that gradually brings around new ways of thinking, acting, and being. So that whole piece reinforcing Theory U and Otto Scharmer's approach of open mind, open heart, open will, thinking, acting, and being different. It's collective wisdom and creating the conditions. So the work of systems change must come from within. The Bioleadership Project talk about this a lot. They're a really good organisation to go and check. And there's a whole piece of work around something called biomimicry. So how would nature handle this? One of the oldest living labs for system change is nature. You imagine if you had to organise spring every year. The complexity of waking up the ground with the temperature changes and the sun and the flowers that emerge and all the insects and the babies that get born. And you imagine trying to coordinate spring every year. Nature does that without fail each year. So biomimicry, this whole thing about what can we learn from nature. And the Bioleadership Project, who lead this work on biomimicry, say that the work of systems change must come from within, from a place of personal transformation. I'm going to talk now a little bit about noticing fear and leaning into it. And this is the bit where I think we're inviting ourselves to go against our initial fear response, that flight response. There's some fantastic work by an author called Joanna Macy. She's a teacher, a scholar. She's been a peace activist for since the 60s, really. And she's done a piece of work with a British GP called Chris Johnston called Active Hope. You can do free training on Active Hope. And the tagline to Active Hope is how to face the mess we're in without going crazy. And it's a really lovely invitation to kind of step into the reality of dealing with grief and loss and all the feelings that come with knowing and facing the knowing around the sort of system failure that we're in. It was set up originally for environmental activists to help them to cope with the reality of looking sort of the climate disaster right in the face. But in fact, over the last few years, Active Hope has become something that local authorities are training their staff in. So Active Hope is a kind of a bunch of techniques really that allow us to think about what might be some of the practices that we will need to cope with the future. And Joanna talks about the fact that in the face of overwhelming social and ecological crisis, this work can help transform despair and apathy into constructive collaborative action. Gwendol Berry, an environmentalist, invites us to lean into fear by saying that it may be when we no longer know what to do that we've come to our real work, and that we will no longer know which way to go that we've come to our real journey. And you can see the echoes of that alongside Otto Scharmer's work with Theory U and the bottom of the curve, being prepared to let go of what we think we know and sit for a while without knowing what's going to be next. That is the point at which we will connect to our higher purpose and the real work of change. I'm going to invite you for a minute, if you can, to just close your eyes while I just read you this. And just let it wash over you. It's 3:23 in the morning, and I'm awake because my great-great-grandchildren won't let me sleep. My great-great-grandchildren ask me in dreams, what did you do while the planet was plundered? What did you do when the earth was unraveling? Surely you did something. When the seasons started failing, as mammals, reptiles, birds were all dying, did you fill the streets with protest when democracy was stolen? What did you do once you knew? There's a whole piece of work that we lean into in fearless leadership around being an ancestor, being a good ancestor, around making decisions that will impact on future generations in a positive way. And it can feel quite out there to talk about the children's fire or decision making for the future generations, born and not yet born. But in fact, in Wales, you have a Future Generations Commissioner whose role is to do just that, to make decisions that are in the best interests of future generations. It's not a million miles away from practices that are commonplace now in local government structures, in national government structures, where we are beginning to understand that we have a responsibility to generations not yet born. The decisions we make today for short-term profit or short-term gain could jeopardize the very planet we live on. Difficult stuff to get our heads around, but important nonetheless. Molly Brown talks about the Great Turning. Now, the Great Turning is one of the three states that are described in Active Hope. And the Great Turning is the point at which we understand what the work is that we need to do, and we move away from the state that's called business as usual. And Molly Young Brown says that when we allow ourselves to share our grief, our rage, our fear, or just our numbness with other people and have them listen to it and accept that and not tell us we shouldn't feel that way, it's like everything else gets released too. It's all in the same container, and we open the container and let the pain out. We also let out the joy and the love. And then we start to see ourselves in the world with new eyes. We start to see how interconnected we are. And you can see there premises around new eyes, seeing ourselves differently, being interconnected, that speaks to the whole systems leadership work, the work of challenging the norms, and that bit about leaning into the feelings and the fear. And Starhawk, an environmental activist, says systems don't change easily. They try to maintain themselves and seek equilibrium. To change a system, you need to shake it up, disrupt the equilibrium that often requires conflict. Now, Starhawk doesn't just mean armed conflict. Starhawk can mean, the conflict of sitting in a meeting and saying, I don't agree, or I don't think that's the only way. That moment when a little part of us knows we need to speak up and say something. That conflict often within ourselves to let out our own no. And we have to move away from centralized power to distributive system leadership. It won't happen without conscious and persistent intention to disrupt how power is held. And I've put here at the bottom, power is not given up willingly, usually, and that provokes fear. And Helen Goulden from the Young Foundation says systems don't change unless they're put under undue pressure. And I think the most important word for me in that sentence is undue. We know that we can't change things unless we're prepared to do things differently. And we're going to invite you to just answer these two questions to each other. So you might want to just have a think about them first. And they're open sentences, so the invitation is for you to finish them. What most scares me about the world right now is ... And what most scares me about what is asked of me is... Most people think that Darwin talked about the survival of the fittest. In fact, what Darwin said is it's not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent. It's the one most adaptable to change. And Darwin was also known to walk around with a notebook where he would write down anything that seemed to disprove his theory, because he was very keen to stay open-minded and to adapt himself. So the importance of being able to cope with change was not lost on Darwin. Dougal Hind, another environmental activist, has some real pearls of wisdom, which I think sometimes for me, certainly with my answer to the first question, sometimes for me the enormity of the change scares me that's needed. And Dougal Hind says, sometimes you're born into the ending of a world. The story you were born into doesn't have much further to run. The future no longer works. This is actually a thing that happens. It's happened to others before you. What moves are worth trying in such a time? First, as far as you can, stop trying to make sense according to the logic of a world that's ending. And I think that's really helpful for me sometimes, to kind of think, actually, am I in service to what is dying, or am I in service to what is emerging? And how do I want to spend my time? I'm 55 now, and I've worked out I've got longer behind me than I've got in front of me. So time becomes a really important metric of value. So I'm going to talk very quickly about leading from purpose. And Mac McCartney, who I talked to you about just briefly before, he's an interesting philosopher and change agent. He's a great author, and he wrote a book about the children's fire. He has 3 questions that help us to identify leading from purpose. He says, what is it that you most deeply and profoundly love? What are your deepest and most profound gifts? And what are my deepest and most profound responsibilities? And his invitation to us when we answer these questions is to move beyond the obvious answers. So he says most of us, when we ask what is it that we most deeply and profoundly love, we'll talk about perhaps our family or our children. And he invites us to think beyond that, to should we extend that love, those responsibilities to the children of others, to our nieces and nephews, to perhaps children of our neighbours, to the people who live at the end of the road that we've never spoken to. Where should our deep and profound love or our profound responsibilities, where should the boundaries of those sit? And so in an exercise, initially by yourselves, just answer these 3 questions. And again, I will put them in chat. What is it that you most deeply and profoundly love? What are your deepest and most profound gifts? Because you've all got them and been born with them. And what are your deepest and most profound responsibilities? Dealing with emotion and system leadership and all of the fear and everything, it can be really tough. It can't be done by yourself. And I want to just talk a little bit about creating a flock and the importance of following as well as leading. And for this, I'm going to show you a video.
If you've learned a lot about leadership and making a movement, then let's watch a movement happen start to finish in under 3 minutes and dissect some lessons. First, of course, a leader needs the guts to stand alone and look ridiculous. But what he's doing is so simple, it's almost instructional. This is key. You must be easy to follow. Now here comes the first follower with a crucial role. He publicly shows everyone else how to follow. Notice how the leader embraces him as an equal. So it's not about the leader anymore, it's about them, plural. Notice how he's calling to his friends to join in. See, it takes guts to be a first follower. You stand out and you brave ridicule yourself. Being a first follower is an underappreciated form of leadership. The first follower transforms a lone nut into a leader. If the leader is the flint, the first follower is the spark that really makes the fire. Now here's the second follower. This is a turning point. It's proof the first has done well. Now it's not a lone nut and it's not two nuts. Three is a crowd and a crowd is news. A movement must be public. Make sure outsiders see more than just the leader. Everyone needs to see the followers because new followers emulate followers, not the leader. Now here come two more people, then three more immediately. Now we've got momentum. This is the tipping point, and now we have a movement. As more people jump in, it's no longer risky. If they were on the fence before, there's no reason not to join in now. They won't stand out, they won't be ridiculed, and they will be part of the in crowd if they hurry. And over the next minute, you'll see the rest who prefer to stay part of the crowd, because eventually they'd be ridiculed for not joining. And ladies and gentlemen, that is how a movement is made. So let's recap what we've learned. If you are a version of the shirtless dancing guy, all alone, remember the importance of nurturing your first few followers as equals, making everything clearly about the movement, not you. Be public, be easy to follow. But the biggest lesson here, did you catch it? Leadership is over-glorified. Yes, it started with the shirtless guy, and he'll get all the credit, but you saw what really happened. It was the first follower that transformed a lone nut into a leader. There's no movement without the first follower. See, we're told that we all need to be leaders, but that would be really ineffective. The best way to make a movement, if you really care, is to courageously follow and show others how to follow. When you find a lone nut doing something great, have the guts to be the first person to stand up and join in.
I love that video. I think it really, in 3 minutes, it just shows exactly that whole point about how you create a movement, the importance of your first followers, the importance of being a follower and spotting nuts, lone nuts as they call them. Yeah, there is some really rich work in that video, and I've watched it countless times, and every time something different jumps out at me. Today, what I really got was the importance of making a movement public. So, making it easy to follow, making it public. But yeah, you'll take from that whatever you want to, and you'll have the link to that in when you get the handouts. Why is leadership and followership important? We can't do this work by ourselves. We really can't do this work by ourselves. And so what we need to be able to do is create followers or join movements and find our flock. And I invite you to think about, that classic geese V formation. Geese work really hard together to get really long distances, and they typically go in a V formation with a lead goose and then geese coming out the side. They flap their wings in synchronicity to reduce the aerodynamic drag on the geese behind them. Such is the collaborative nature of the way that they do the work. But invariably, the lead goose drops to the back and the new goose takes over. And it's that notion that we can't go long distances and make big change unless we're doing it in collaboration together. And reducing the aerodynamic drag of all our emotions on each other. I want to talk a little bit about nurturing courage. I'm going to canter through it because we've got one more video, and I want to just give us a chance to say something at the end. So I'm going to invite you to get pen and paper, please. Just get that ready. And I just want to talk very briefly about courage and why it's important. So Brené Brown, whose work is amazing on courage and vulnerability. If you want to explore it more, I invite you to go and see explore Brené Brown's work. She's very easy to consume in terms of her academic work. You can watch a Netflix video, you can listen to various podcasts, and then she's also got some really easy to read books. She talks about courage, and she says the root of the word courage is cor, the Latin for heart. One of its earliest forms, the word courage meant to speak one's mind by telling all one's heart. Courage is a heart word. We need to be brave. And in fact, Brené Brown, when she talks about courage, talks about it in relation to vulnerability. And she says that the measure of how courageous people are is their willingness to make themselves vulnerable. And you can see that in the way that people are prepared to show up. There are 6 types of courage. This was all brand new to me when I came across it. And I'll just quickly go through them. There is physical courage, to keep going with resiliency, balance and awareness. Social courage, to be yourself unapologetically. Not easy, ever. often when you read that, teenagers come to mind, you know, that whole thing where they start to look like each other and their friends. Actually, all of us, you know, I moved to Essex recently and never before have I had so many pairs of shorts, because everybody on the beach in Essex, even in the winter, is wearing shorts. I found myself, without even realising it, thinking, oh, I need more shorts. So the social courage to be ourselves unapologetically. Moral courage, doing the right thing even when it's uncomfortable or unpopular. I've heard that come out in a couple of the things I was listening in on in the groups this morning. Emotional courage, feeling all of your emotions, positive and negative, without guilt or attachment. And what that means is not stopping yourself from crying, not stopping yourself from having the giggles, you know, not judging yourself if you feel ashamed or embarrassed about something, you know, letting your emotions go through you without attaching to them. You know, you're not your emotions. They're a temporary state. So emotional courage is letting yourself feel them all. Intellectual courage, to learn, unlearn, and relearn with an open and flexible mind. And spiritual courage, living with purpose and meaning through a heart-centered approach towards life and oneself. Now, what I want you to do is I'm going to show you a courage map, and I want you to draw this if you can. But if you wouldn't mind drawing an axis so a horizontal line that on one end says intellectual, on the other end says spiritual, and then a diagonal line from physical to emotional, and another diagonal line going the other way from moral to social. Put 0 in the middle, and basically what I want you to do in a minute, and just do this, you know, in terms of where you are today and how you're feeling right now, is just give yourself a rating. And just draw yourself a map. So once you've put a little cross on your axis for each of those where you rate yourself, 0 is I don't have any at all. 5 is I have completely nailed this and there's nothing more I could learn. So give yourself a little rating, and then once you put a cross on each of the axes, join all the crosses up, and then you see the shape of your courage. The last bit of the presentation now really is practice, practice, practice. So doing things differently. You won't nail it first time. This is my favourite quote ever, actually, and I use this on a daily basis to think about how I'm spending my time. Adrienne Marie Brown, who's an emergent strategist, she talks all about emergent strategy and systems leadership. She says we create change by practicing. You're always practicing something. You're either practicing upholding the world as it is, or you're practicing shifting into the world as you want it to be. And on a daily basis, I check in with myself and I say, is what I'm doing now going to serve a world that's dying or the world as it was, or is it going to bring around a future I know I need to be part of creating? I absolutely love this quote. If I give you nothing else, it would be this. Or in the words of the gurus from the 1980s, it ain't what you do, it's the way that you do it, and that's what gets the results. Annie Dillard says, how we spend our days is, of course, how we live our lives. First, it's an intention, then a behaviour, then a habit, then a practice, then second nature, then it becomes simply who you are. And I love this quote. I think that how we spend our days is how we live our lives, but we don't often think about that enough. And if I look back at my life, then it will be a collection of the days that I lived. And do I want to spend today upholding a world that's dying and that isn't working for the very needy and the most deprived in our communities? Or do I want to spend my day today bringing about a change and making it a more just and equitable society? Well, I know the answer to that for me. So I'm going to show you a video and then we're going to close. The invitation is to watch this video and see courage, to see where you think courage turns up. It's also a shameless attempt to make you feel better by the end of this workshop, because I've taken you to some dark places potentially. So enjoy. It's another sort of 3 or 4 minute one. And it was actually a TV advert. I'm not going to say any more.
It's easy to put people in boxes. There's us, and there's them. The high earners, and those just getting by. Those we trust, and those we try to avoid. There's the new Danes, and those who've always been here. The people from the countryside, and those who've never seen a cow. The religious, and the self-confident. There are those we share something with, and those we don't share anything with.
Velkommen. Jeg kommer til at stille jer nogle spørgsmål i dag. Nogle af dem kan godt være lidt personlige, men jeg håber, I vil svare ærligt på dem. Hvem herinde i rummet var klassens klovn? Hvem er bonusforældre?
And then suddenly, there's us. We who believe in life after death. We who've seen UFOs. And all of us who love to dance. We who've been bullied. And we who've bullied others. And then there's us, the lucky ones who've had sex this past week. We who are broken-hearted. We who are madly in love. We who feel lonely. We who are bisexual. And we who acknowledge the courage of others. We who have found the meaning of life. And we who have saved lives. And then there's all of us who just love Denmark. So maybe there's more that brings us together than we think. TV2 Denmark. All that we share.